Manila continues to slump in the Smart City Index. It now ranks 125th out of 146 cities, falling 4 spots from last year. This is Manila's lowest ranking ever, based on data from Switzerland-based International Institute for Management Development. The Smart City Index tracks how cities use technology to improve daily life. It looks at 5 key areas: health and safety, mobility, activities, opportunity, and governance.
Also, a new social weather stations or SWS survey shows that over 14 million Filipino families consider themselves poor. That's a staggering 52% of 1,800 respondents surveyed between March 15 and 20. This figure is slightly higher than the February one, but down from 63% last December. More Filipinos now say that they are not poor, reaching a record high 36% this quarter. Meanwhile, about 12 to 14% see themselves as borderline poor, slightly up from 11% on the year. The highest self-rated poverty rates came from the Visayas and Mindanao, while Metro Manila recorded the most families who don't consider themselves as poor.
Manila's Smart City ranking continues to drop, and millions of Filipinos still consider themselves poor, with hunger on the rise. And to help us make sense of these numbers, we're joined by Sonny, Africa, Executive Director of IBON Foundation. Good evening. Let's begin with the drop in Manila's ranking from down to 125 out of 146. We're the cellar dweller. And all these dire results of surveys, what does this say about the country?
Well, first off, I want to start with, well, hello everyone. Sorry, good evening. We actually have a problem with these smart city indices because they do tend to emphasize a very narrow technology-oriented view of progress. Unfortunately, deploying technology without the real context of inequality, informal economies, extent of public services, actually would tend to give a misleading picture of the real state of the city. So I think it might be appropriate to more higher income countries to talk about technology, but with more basic problems, in all honesty, I wouldn't give too much weight to smart city indicators. Having said that, I think it's a bit revealing, especially with all this hype about reaching upper middle income status. I don't think very many people realize that even by the indicator of gross domestic product per capita, which is the main indicator for upper middle income status, the Philippines is actually in the bottom third worldwide. So I think the result of the smart city indices indicated by IMEDE, I think it just actually reflects how there is actually quite a lot for the Philippines to do in terms of basic technological infrastructure. But again, I do want to stress we shouldn't be too obsessed about the technology and infrastructure because there are actually more basic problems, I think, in terms of assessing, our cities by more development-oriented, people-oriented metrics.
Okay, true. So let's leave that survey, set it aside, and go to our internal problems and the survey on poverty as well as hunger. Actually, the survey on hunger is really more surprising.
Yeah.
May you comment?
Yeah, our main comment is if you look at actually the details of how the SW survey was presented, they noted a decline in poverty, in self-rated poverty in general. It went down from about 63% in December to 52%. So self-rated poor actually went down, but it was actually very striking that while the number of self-rated poor and percentage fell, the number of hungry Filipinos actually increased. I think that's quite revealing because our main concern about a lot of the anti-poverty, anti-hunger social assistance programs, especially in the run to the election period, they're becoming very politically manipulated. So for the longest time, we've been complaining that there is a problem with the general decline in aid this 2025, but with the decline the SBS survey, where basically those who are really needy, the poorest, apparently didn't get it because hunger, the most basic need being food, the neediest didn't get the aid apparently, hence the increase. However, those on kind of the, I think, upper end of the poverty scale, those of the borderline poor, they actually fell, reflected in, I think, lower self-rated poverty. I think that does tend to support the notion that a lot of the aid didn't go to the most needy, but they went to the most maybe politically expedient for politicians.
Or those have been said, right? Yung mga ayuda does not exactly go. Specifically, yung mga iba napupunta sa kulang yung income, etc. But, Sonny, what I wanted to ask is, while all these results are coming out, while all these surveys are coming out, nag-reorg din yung NEDA and naging DepDev siya. What do you think of that that change? And do you think ito ba talaga yung solusyon? Is this a good move? Should we actually be, tinkering with these things?
It seems to be a cosmetic change because the bottom line is, you don't need an organizational change to address the problem of, for instance, hunger. What's the problem with hunger? Two things. Are foods too expensive because agriculture is being neglected and has been for decades? Secondly, Filipinos don't have their purchasing power because the economy is not creating enough jobs or quality jobs to give them purchasing power. So you don't need actually, some whatever change in NEDA to fix that. You just need a reorientation, spend more in agriculture. Let's not normalize agricultural backwardness. Also, spend more in developing industry like the US is doing to create jobs in the Philippines that are quality, expanding for the formal sector, and actually increasing the level of productivity and incomes. And that we always have these sort of cycles of cosmetic or shows of change, when in the end, I think it's so alarming. Decade after decade, administration after administration, they all have their own gimmick to try to change things, but they just have to focus on the basics. You have to spend on agriculture, you have to spend and protect domestic industry. And if you don't do those two things, if you're afraid to antagonize whoever, whatever political entrenched interests might be affected, all these things are just going to be for show.
Well, Sonny, you also have the SWD Undersecretary Irene Dumlao referring to this rise in hunger as just public perception, while she suggests that what they see in government data is quite different. What do you make of the government's methodology where they base it on family income and expenditure compared to the SWS survey, which actually asks a sample of the population?
Well, of course, it is half true that there is no single perfect indicator or survey. There are pros and cons to the SWS survey. The main pro is that it's frequent, it's quarterly. So it's very odd for the government to not be doing more frequent surveys to measure poverty and hunger. So one big thing going with the SWS survey, it's frequent, so it gives high, a very updated data on the state of Filipino families. Its main con is that, of course, it is a subjective indicator. Basically, asks them, do you feel poor? Have you experienced involuntary hunger in the last 3 months? So in that sense, it's a bit weak. On the other hand, government poverty surveys, they will happen every 2 years. And for the longest time, they will happen every 3 years. There's supposed to be an annual poverty indicator survey that has been stopped for lack of a budget. The family income expenditure survey, the last happened in 2022, I believe. The next one is in 2024. The results will get in about late 2025 or maybe early 2026. So big problem with the government data. It's not happening frequently enough. There's no budget for that. At the same time, the strength is it is based on a bit more quote-unquote objective indicators of how much incomes families have. But I think it's a bit disappointing. I didn't hear that until now. It's a bit disappointing for the Social Welfare Secretary to sort of fall back on outdated government data to see that things are doing good. I mean, unless there's any doubt to the veracity of the SWS data or their methodology, it is important to recognize poverty is widespread, is deep. Hunger is the best indicator of how deep poverty is. It is increasing, and there are other reasons to support that. Joblessness is worsening. There are no real new jobs being created, and compared to the past year, the last day before survey, maybe about 200,000 jobs have been created, but mostly informal jobs, meaning low earning, low purchasing power. So I think if you put together a lot of different indicators, it actually supports more strongly the idea that food is expensive despite low inflation. Filipinos can afford food because they're have informal jobs, uncertain jobs, low wages. At the same time, there's the SWS survey saying people feel poor, 52%. People feel hungry, and sorry, experiencing volatile hunger, about 27%, so about 7.5 million Filipinos. I think it's very disappointing, honestly, if the Social Welfare Secretary said that if anything, the government should err on the side of caution and conservatism, not sort of be so dismissive. I mean, that's a bad sign. And changing the NEDA's name or reorganizing it, if it doesn't change the attitude of people towards the poor, towards a desperate need, to change your attitude towards your basic economic policies. I mean, again, case in point, it's so much sound and fury in the end, signifying nothing really.
The contrast is so stark between the figures on hunger between the Visayas and Mindanao and Metro Manila. What, how can the government, address this quickly? Going back to the USEC of DSWD, they attribute this to Canlaon.
Yeah, they're saying it's dragging down the national figure because of the protracted eruption.
Disasters, typhoons.
Right.
I'm so sorry. I've been depressed. Maybe I've been paying attention to media. I think to look for single factor problems, that is the problem. I mean, the reason for there is so much poverty, it's structural. People are poor. People do not have any jobs. Those who don't have jobs aren't getting enough supplementary income from cash assistance. Even if they do get, food is expensive on the market. So I think, of course you have, variations around the trend of deep poverty, deep hunger. Of course, once in a while, there's a calamity, there's volcanic eruption, you have El Nino episodes. But the thing is, all these natural occurrences, we know they happen. So I think it's a bit weird to be blaming these one-off occurrences as if they were one-off historically, without realizing they are a chronic part of the Philippine landscape of poverty. If you want to fix poverty, fix the basics, and then do the emergency measures in reaction to, again, these episodic occurrences. And I think the bottom line is, for instance, just for 2025, the government cut the budget for ayuda. From the about 80 billion cut in ayuda, main biggest change was 60 billion from the 40s. The government ayuda program was cut, and then the smaller ayuda program, a bigger amount was put in the hands of politicians to the protective services for individuals, to the notorious ACA program. So I think that's the problem. That's where the problem is right there. The government should have resources, but it's not using it well. The government should mobilize more resources, but out of austerity measures, they're cutting ayuda, but they're not cutting infrastructure programs that really benefit big corporations in the NCR-CLST. It's so crazy now. They have 2/3 of programs, infrastructure programs, focused in NCR, Central Luzon, and Southern Tagalog. But the most needy regions with the biggest hunger, the Visayas, Mindanao, they're not even getting the infrastructure that is supposed to be the flagship pro-development program for government. So I think there's just wrong. This is a wrong orientation. The government can do so much, but it's not actually doing the right things in the right places.
But that's exactly the irony, right? We've been talking about this exact same topic, and it's exact same justifications and the exact same reasons. But in your assessment, Sonny, is there any sort of policy that has improved in order to serve these people or our people better, especially yung mga nasa laylayan, no? Just to give us like a bright spark.
Well, I think it's better to see how dark things are so we can set things right. I mean, if we're going to look for a bright spark, there's no point. I mean, in the reality, since under the Marcos administration, even according to the SWS surveys, the number of self-rated poor has increased from about 12 million in June 2022 to about 14.1, 14.2 million now. So there are more self-rated poor beyond the population increase. Even worse, the very poorest of the poor, hunger. There are about less than 3 million hungry families in June 2022. It's more than doubled to about 7.5 million right now in March 2025. So I think rather than sort of find bright spots in Kadiwa, the food stamps program, food security emergency committees, I think it's better to realize all these cosmetic or shows of effort, like the Kadiwa Center, the food stamps program, the food security program. I think it's much better to accept these aren't working because they're cosmetic solutions. So we can do what needs to be done. And again, let's not normalize agricultural backwardness. Let's not vilify ayuda as if it's a dole-out thing. Ayuda is needed in times of need. But fundamentally, if you want to fix the ayuda program, it's about creating jobs. And if you don't do, for instance, an industrialization program, if the most powerful country in the world, the US, sees fit to protect and support American industry, what more the Philippines, whose industry has been hollowed out for the last 40 years? I think it's just the basics are there. It just has to be given attention to.
Well, thank you very much, Sonny Africa, Executive Director of IBON Foundation, for painting a clear, real picture for us.